And so basically, this course is called Buddhism in a Nutshell. And this course is also recorded so that people, if you can't make a session or something like that, you can always go to our website and find the recording of it and catch up on things. But it's usually a small class. It's usually a small number of people who are physically present. Sometimes more people listen to the recordings. But so being small, the purpose of it is feel free to ask lots of questions. Let's see, one thing I should do is I should make it so that there's a way that I should make it so that the camera always focuses on me. Hang on, yeah, okay. So now it's done that. Sorry. It's been a while since I've taught one of these courses, so I tend to forget that I should set it up to focus on me all the time. So the recording always focuses on me. Okay, so anyway, the whole purpose of this thing is to actually, as I was talking about before, to give an overview of Buddhism. And as I was saying before, it's often very helpful to experienced as well as brand new people. So it's considered an introductory course. And so for that reason, we don't do any ritual in these classes. We don't do any Buddhist prayers or any other things that you often see in other classes. And that's because it's designed for people who might be new to Buddhism, who just want to find out about it. And so for that reason, we want to make them as comfortable as possible so that they feel like they're not making any commitments. And so again, you should always feel like you have the freedom to ask questions as much as you want, because that's the purpose. The purpose of this is to answer your questions. And one of the other purposes that I always do is that I introduce a lot of Buddhist terminology, because when people start individual courses, they sometimes get lost in the terminology. And so part of my purpose in this course is also to explain all of the main Buddhist terminology in as simple a way as possible. So things that I will discuss in this course, for example, will be the life story of Buddha, the history of Buddhism, how it evolved and spread throughout everywhere. I'll talk about one point of major emphasis will be on the Four Noble Truths, which is considered the core of Buddhist teachings, no matter what tradition, whatever type of Buddhism you come to. I will also try to explain what the main different types of Buddhism are, why there are so many different types of Buddhism, and sort of, but at heart, you should realize that the Four Noble Truths sort of underlies all of Buddhism, no matter what version you find yourself in. And then the other type of typical terminology is rebirth, samsara, nirvana, karma, afflictions, delusions, in Sanskrit called klesha. What's the difference between liberation and enlightenment, for example? And there is a difference, and many people don't even know that there is such a difference. I will talk about the path to Buddhism, the path to enlightenment or liberation, the importance of the guru, dharma, renunciation, what refuge means, which has a special technical meaning in Buddhism, what the main morality is in Buddhism, bodhicitta, emptiness, tantra, and at the end I'll even talk about tantra and vajrayana. And so anyway, there's a lot to cover, and of course I can't go very deeply into any individual topic because this is sort of an overview. But I always try to go into enough detail so you can really sort of get the essence of the idea. And then whatever interests you, especially with Zoom and everything that's so available now, it's pretty easy to go online and find more details about any specific topic that interests you. Okay. So, yeah, and I think another thing that's a little bit useful to mention is our center is a Tibetan Buddhist center. So the main orientation of this class is a Tibetan Buddhist orientation. However, I try to be sort of equal-handed to all traditions and to try to look for sort of the common ground among all the traditions. So I'm not trying to just push the Tibetan version, but I try to be fairly even-handed. Okay, so in the beginning, what I want to talk about is I want to talk about really general things. I want to talk about what is Buddhism? Who is a Buddhist? How is, and especially what I want to talk about and what I find most interesting for me is, in my mind, the most striking thing about Buddhism, and actually the thing that I find most attractive about Buddhism, is it's a radical different way of thinking about the world. And in sort of modern parlance, or in our modern environment, there's a lot of Buddhist terms that have migrated into common usage, mindfulness, karma, a lot of different things, nirvana, samsara. You hear a lot of Buddhist terminology in news stories and various other things, but oftentimes it's not really quite correct the way that it's taken, or even rebirth is a thing that is talked about, well, not only in Buddhism, but also in Hinduism and other forms. But anyway, what I would like to clarify is the specific Buddhist way of looking at it. So at least you have an understanding of that. And I'll try to sort of explain what I mean by saying that Buddhism has a radical different way of looking at things. Okay. So before going into what Buddhism is, let me just talk a little bit about who is a Buddhist and who isn't a Buddhist. And different religious traditions have, different ways that they tackle this problem. In some religions, you need to go through a special ceremony, a baptism, or some other ceremony to initiate you into the religion. And Buddhism is completely without any of that sort of superstructure. Basically, what determines who a Buddhism is the person themselves. Tradition, and basically what makes you a Buddhist is simply believing or having some confidence, not even necessarily belief, but just having some confidence that Buddhism can help you, that Buddhist teachings can help you in your ordinary life. Traditionally, what's said in the Buddhist philosophies is that what makes you a Buddhist is going to refuge to the three jewels. And the three jewels are Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. But again, we'll talk about that in more detail, what it means to go for refuge. Going for refuge means, going for help, getting some help in living your ordinary life, dealing with the difficulties of life and so forth. But essentially, what these three terms, these three jewels are, is of course Buddha, who was a real historical figure who taught us about Buddhism. And Dharma is what they call a polysemous word, meaning a word that can be used, have many different meanings depending on context. But the main meaning that Dharma usually refers to in a Buddhist context is it just means Buddhist teachings. So in this context of going to refuge, that's what they mean, is Buddhist teachings. And the Sangha can have a more technical meaning. It can have a special technical meaning of people who have high realizations, sometimes called noble beings. But more generally, it just means the people who are the ordinary people who follow Buddhism. And Sangha, and so you might think that Sangha is a little bit of a strange thing. Why is that dragged in? But the Buddha himself always referred to these three jewels, and he always included Sangha, Buddhist practitioners. And I think part of the reason for that is Buddha in his teachings always emphasized how helpful friends are and what a huge difference they make to your spiritual path. And having a Buddhist Sangha, a collection of friends who are trying to practice Buddhism in a serious way, the same way you are, is an absolutely enormous help to your spiritual progress. And of course, you also need, let's see, Aaron, you have a question. Go ahead.
So I know there's this, it's a term that pops up right now called virtuous friend. Is that related to the Sangha?
Well, yes and no. I mean, a virtuous friend, I think, is the Tibetan form, if I'm remembering correctly, is the Tibetan form for a geshe, which is a person in the Gelug tradition who has a sort of like basically like a PhD in Buddhism. And it may more generally refer to sort of some of the teachers or whatever. So the Sangha actually, I think, is broader than just virtuous friend. So I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So anyway, you know, Buddha always strongly emphasized how important it is to have friends who are Buddhists. And in a similar way, he also talked about how important it is to move away from people who will not help you in your spiritual practice, that will drag you away into some form of negativity in some way or another, because it's easy to get sort of knocked off track from the spiritual path. And so I think that's why the Sangha is important. And of course, the Sangha also includes our teachers. And in Buddhism, teachers are considered to be very important, because how else would you learn anything? But ultimately, in the long run, there is sort of a deeper meaning to there's this word guru, which is basically means teacher. Another lama is the Tibetan term for guru. Guru is a Sanskrit term. And of course, Sanskrit and Indian languages are important in Buddhism because Buddha originally lived in India. And he didn't speak Sanskrit. He probably knew Sanskrit very well, but he spoke a local Indian dialect that was probably based on Sanskrit, in the same way that our Romance languages, French, Italian, and so forth, evolved from Latin. So the analogy would be that Latin would be analogous to Sanskrit, and Italian Roman would be analogous to the local dialect that people like Buddha spoke to. And I'll talk more about this as we go along. So anyways, so these are the three jewels. And so these are considered to be essentially ways to help you. You need a teacher, so you need a Buddha. You need to understand what you need to practice, and that's what the Dharma is. And you need to be supported in your practice, and that's what the Buddhist Sangha is. Okay. So the other thing too, that I want to keep emphasizing the mindset of Buddhism, and what is it that, how Buddhism is different from other religions. And the purpose of doing this is not because I like difference, or it's not because I want to say that Buddhism is better than other religions or anything like that, but because this sort of way of looking at the world is sort of so unique, I want to sort of help you find that worldview and sort of understand how it operates. And the best way of doing it is sort of making these distinctions so you can see how the Buddhist worldview is different. And through doing that, I'm hoping that you'll eventually sort of come to understand the Buddhist way of looking at the world. And one important way of starting out with is, especially in coming from the classical Western European tradition, which has migrated to the United States, is that in Christianity, which has been sort of the dominant religion in the West for, I don't know, several thousand years, several millennia, in Christianity, there's a strong emphasis on what you believe. And in fact, during the Reformation period, Christians were even slaughtering each other, burning each other at the stake, even if they deviated in just a small way from what other people believed in. So in the Christian tradition, belief has always been, what you believe has actually been incredibly important and has played an incredibly important role in defining who is a Christian and who isn't, for example. and what sect you belong to and so forth. However, Buddhism comes from the East, and in the East, belief is not so important. Of course, there are Buddhist beliefs. There's a Buddhist philosophical tradition. There is, there's a set of core teachings that we consider to be Buddhism. But the point of it is that you actually, as a Buddhist, you don't have to believe any of it. In fact, there's a guy named, I think it's Stephen Batchelor, who goes around writing books that says, well, you don't have to believe in rebirth, you don't have to believe in karma, but here's how to practice Buddhism anyway. So I think for most people who are Buddhists, they would consider rebirth and karma sort of core Buddhist beliefs. And yet here you have a person writing books and very popular who completely ignores it. And I think that's sort of the main point about Buddhism, is that it's not really about belief, it's about practice, how you actually live your life. And so that's something that I want to, so to be a Buddhist, you don't have to have any special set of beliefs. In fact, there are Buddhists who are still Christian or belong to other types of religions and who still consider themselves Buddhists at the same time. So Buddhism is sort of a very flexible thing. And of course, that's going to be my struggle in trying to define it and explain it to you. But as we go along and you see examples, I think you'll get more and more of the idea. And in fact, Buddha said, going along with this notion of beliefs, one important teaching that the Buddha taught is the Buddha said, you don't have to believe even me. What the Buddha said is that you really, and this is a core idea in Buddhism, is ultimately in Buddhism, you have to come to your own realizations. And the Buddha is just a guide to point out the way. and essentially Buddha has said, I've become an enlightened being. I know how to do it. I can point you in the right direction. But in Buddhism, nobody blesses you. You don't become enlightened or a Buddha-like figure by being blessed or going through any religious ceremony. The way you become a Buddha is actually by transforming your mind, creating a pure mind, getting rid of the negativities in your mind stream. And only you can do that. The Buddha will tell you how to help yourself accomplish that. In fact, the Buddha is very specific. And one of the things that I love about Buddhist teachings is the Buddha gives really all sorts of practical advice for accomplishing everything that needs to be accomplished. For example, anger is considered to be a negative state of mind. And as Buddhists, we try to remove our anger. But the way we do that, Buddha just doesn't say, don't be angry. He says, think about anger in this way, meditate on this. And so there's like 50 different ways of working on your anger. And also the other thing that's important is Buddhism is based on understanding. The fundamental problem in Buddhism is actually ignorance. And it's ignorance that prevents us from achieving our spiritual goals. And so it's really understanding that's going to actually help us deal with all of this. And so it's not just, it's not just this idea that we shouldn't be angry. You understand what you need to do is you also need to understand, why shouldn't I be angry? What's the problem with anger? And to do that is actually done in a very experiential way. It's a way where you can explore your anger and you can see for yourself that it's a negative state of mind. So anyway, I will come back and talk more about this as we go along. The other thing too is that Buddha did talk about faith being important for Buddhism. However, the faith that Buddha talks about is not blind faith. It's not just somebody tells you, you have to believe this or you'll go to hell or something like that. But what faith really means in a Buddhist context is faith basically means having confidence that the teachings will in some way help you. And Buddhism always has this practical way of looking at the world. I mean, Buddha, you never do things just sort of pro forma. You don't do a religious right or something like that, and that's what saves you. It's actually how you do it. And everything that you do in Buddhism, you constantly look and see, is this effective? Is this working? Is this helping me to develop more wholesome states of mind? Is this actually helping me on the spiritual path? There was actually a very interesting sutra. I'll talk about what sutras are at some point. But anyway, there was a Buddhist teaching. Buddha went to some town, and these people complained. They said, all these religious teachers are coming through our town, and each of them is teaching a different thing. So how do I know which one is right? And what the Buddha basically said is, he basically tried to give the people confidence in themselves. And he says, is what these religious teachers teaching you, is it wholesome? Is it beneficial to you? Is it making you a better person? These are the sorts of things that you need to look at. And once you start looking at these things, you will begin to know for yourself whether you should, which teachers you should believe and follow and so forth. So it's this practical notion of always looking at what's going on and is it effective? Is it working? Okay, so one thing that I will also talk about is there is this notion of nirvana or enlightenment. And I will give more details about this as we go along. And so this is the end goal, and there's also a notion called liberation, which most people think of as synonymous with nirvana and full enlightenment. But there are subtle distinctions between these terms, which as it comes up, I will explain in more detail. But nonetheless, so in Buddhism, there is this grand goal. And there's also the notion of samsara. And nirvana basically means liberation from samsara. And samsara roughly means the ordinary world that we live in. And so you'll have to ask yourself, what's wrong with this ordinary world that we live in that you want to be liberated from it? And why are you trying to do this? And what do you hope to achieve through this liberation, which I will explain in more detail. However, the one thing I want to emphasize is you shouldn't get hung up on enlightenment. I think especially when you get new Buddhist practitioners, they often feel like, oh, well, this is what I got to do. I got to focus on enlightenment. And, I got to make it happen as fast as possible, hopefully tomorrow, or some ridiculously short time. And however, I think that's actually a mistake. I mean, when you understand what samsara is, when you understand what nirvana is and so forth, I think you will understand why we have this goal of nirvana. But I think the more important thing is actually day-to-day Buddhism. And in fact, the Buddha actually talked about this specifically in the sense that Buddha said, Buddhism is good in the beginning, it's good in the middle, and it's good in the end. And what he meant by this is that the practice of Buddhism is beneficial. Even practicing even a little bit of Buddhism is very, very beneficial in the sense that it makes a positive, beneficial impact on our lives. It actually helps us in a very concrete way live our lives. However, it's also helpful in the middle. Once you're full into your practice and you're engaging in frequent Buddhist practice, Buddhism is still helping you in your lives. And even at the end of your period of spiritual growth, when you're close to liberation or enlightenment, it is still beneficial to you. So it is always beneficial, no matter where you are, what stage you're practicing. And so I think that's the thing you really want to focus on. You want to focus on using Buddhism to make each and every day more helpful. In fact, one thing I haven't talked about is why would you want to become a Buddhist? Why would you want to learn about Buddhism? What is the benefit of Buddhism? And so I think it's helpful to actually talk from a personal point of view, because for me, the way that I feel about Buddhism and the reason I practice it is because the way I like to put it, it's sort of like being sane in an insane world. So Buddhism helps me to feel sane, even though so much of the world is getting blown up. You see, with Ukraine and coronavirus, all sorts of things are always happening. And Buddhism is a way of learning how to live sanely in the midst of all of this normal chaos of ordinary life, what we would say as a Buddhist, the chaos of samsara. And so to me, I find Buddhism helpful all the time in dealing with the difficulties of my own life. And the other thing too that I think is important about Buddhism is, and in fact, the Buddha talked about this in his teachings, there's a certain joy in Buddhism. One thing, I actually first started learning about Buddhism at a course in world religions in college. And at that point, I found myself very attracted to Buddhist teachings. And then finally, about 20 years ago, I took actually an introduction to Buddhism course, pretty much like this course is. And I enjoyed it so much that I kept practicing. And so I've been practicing pretty much ever since, almost 20 years. And the one thing that's always kept me going in Buddhism is it just makes me joyful just to go to teachings, to hear Buddhist teachings, to read Buddhist books. There's a certain, freshness, spontaneity, beauty in it that I just find extraordinarily attractive. And it's almost like I'm addicted to it in some sense. Although we'll see, the Buddha always said you shouldn't become addicted or attached to anything. But nonetheless, this joy in practice is a part of Buddhism. And it's part of what one term that is a step to enlightenment, which is called basically energy or effort. And sometimes they talk about it as joyous effort. And to practice Buddhism really successfully, you need this kind of joyous effort. You need to feel joyful when you're practicing Buddhism. And there are reasons why you can feel joyous, but actually this joyfulness is a huge motivating factor that I think is very sustaining. And you find it also in meditation in the same way. But anyway, I will come back and talk more about that. But at any rate, that's my own personal thing. And I think that in a certain sense, that's actually a better way to practice Buddhism, to focus on day-to-day, practice on becoming a better person every single day. And I think you will find that if you actually focus on that, then you won't get so caught up in this sort of goal seeking, like, oh, am I a little bit closer to enlightenment today or not? Or, somehow trying to gauge that. But the one thing I can guarantee is that if you joyfully practice Buddhism day by day, keep trying to make yourself a better person and focus on that, you definitely will accomplish full enlightenment at some point. And the other thing too that I think is important in Buddhist philosophy, the Buddhist way of looking at the world, is realizing that the one thing that Buddha always emphasizes is causes and conditions. In Buddhism, nothing happens randomly. Everything happens due to causes and conditions. Not usually a single cause and condition, but almost everything that happens to us is actually, there's multiple causes and conditions that all come together that make what happens. And in fact, this notion of cause and effect is a deep part of karma also, which I will talk about and explain more. But so basically, one way of explaining this way of looking at the world is you can ask yourself, well, how am I going to become enlightened, if that is your goal? And the way that you have to look at it is the way that you're going to become enlightened is by creating all the causes and conditions to become enlightened. So creating the causes and conditions to become enlightened basically means practicing Buddhism on a regular basis, trying to make yourself a better, more wholesome person. And by doing that practice, that's how you eventually become enlightened. So nobody's going to bless you and suddenly you're going to become enlightened or a Buddha-like figure. You have to put in the work to accomplish that. However, I think the positive thing that I see in doing that work is for many people, when they hear that, they immediately become discouraged. They say, oh, becoming, removing all the negativities in my mind to become the perfect person that a Buddha is impossible. It's too overwhelming. And the only thing I will say about that is there's a notion of positive karma, which I think people don't realize. I think almost everybody inadvertently focuses on negative karma. Negative karma means creating causes and conditions to experience pain or suffering in the future. But there is also positive karma, and positive karma just doesn't make it so you experience more pleasant conditions in the future. But positive karma also has a spiritual aspect. You need positive karma to achieve spiritual realizations, to move forward on the practice, on the path, on the spiritual path. And so positive karma can ripen as in a way that it ripens as advancing your spiritual life. And as you go along in Buddhist practice, you keep creating more and more positive karma, which accelerates your spiritual progression. So in a certain sense, I sort of see Buddhism as sort of accelerating as you go to the higher levels, because you create more and more positive karma, which again ripens in more and more spiritual progress. So I think you should not take it as, even though at the beginning your spiritual progress may seem difficult, it may seem that it's going very slowly, but you shouldn't assume that it's always going to be like that. That it will get easier. And I think also the other thing that makes it easier is as that you go to higher and higher levels, you become more and more motivated. You see the value of what you're doing in a more and more direct, obvious way. And you feel that sort of joy that I was talking about that encourages you to move forward. So even though there is this causality in Buddhism and you have to do the work to achieve spiritual progress, nonetheless, you should not feel like it's hopeless and that you're doing it all by yourself. And again, I think that's the help of the Buddhist Sangha. There are other people who have gone before us that have gone deeper in this path, who have a lot of practical advice and will help us. We have many, many wonderful teachers at our centers and other Buddhist centers around the world that can be really inspiring and helpful. So at any rate, I would say, don't worry about getting discouraged, but just focus on making your life better. And again, I think it's helpful to give little practical examples so you get a feeling for this. And so I will give one practice that I actually engage in every single day. And in fact, it's the simplest practice I know of. And even the Buddha spoke of it as being extraordinarily powerful. It's part of what the Buddha talked about as the 4 Brahma Viharas. Brahma being a term. In Hinduism, Brahma was sort of the creator god, the most powerful god. And in this context, though, it's not referring to that. Brahma is referring to just sort of the highest development of something. And Vihara basically is a Sanskrit or Pali word that means dwelling. So it means dwelling in sort of the highest states. So these are practices that bring you to dwelling in the highest states. And what's wonderful about them is that they're not even particularly Buddhist in some sense. So there are 4 of these things. The 2 higher ones involve a little more knowledge of Buddhism. So I will talk about the first 2, which is plenty to practice. So what does this practice consist of? What this practice consists of is, I will give an example. You go to the grocery store, you look at the person in front of you, and you say, may you be happy. So you wish with all of your heart that this person who is standing there in front of you really be happy, really experience happiness. The second part is you say, may you never experience any suffering. May you be free from suffering. And you really try to believe wholeheartedly that you wish that this person never experienced any type of suffering. And so that's basically the practice. And what's interesting, so like I was saying, that anybody could do this, it doesn't involve any sort of notion of Buddhist beliefs or something like that. It's just this very simple human act. But in doing this act, these 4 Brahma Viharas, the Buddha talked about as being extraordinarily powerful. Extraordinary, it creates huge amounts of positive karma. If you were reborn, this can take you to some of the very highest spheres of rebirth. It's extraordinarily powerful. And basically, when you practice this, one thing that you should pay attention to is, how does it make you feel when you do this action? And I think what you will feel, if you feel something similar to what I have felt, it makes you happy. As soon as you try to engage in this activity, you will find it'll give you sort of a blissful feeling. And this practice you can do all day long. You can be driving down the road and look at the person in front of you and you say, may you be happy. May you be free from suffering. And you try to really, even if it's artificial, you try to wish for these 2 things to happen with all of your soul, if you like. And what you will do is, it's a way of achieving instant happiness. Very, very simple practice. But if you're ever in a negative state, if you're ever feeling depressed, try this practice. Do it with everybody you meet. You can even do it more generalized. You can wish everybody in your hometown to be happy, to be free from suffering. You can wish everybody in the whole country to be happy and free from suffering. You can wish everybody in the whole world to be happy and free from suffering. And in fact, the way that the Buddha did it, expressed it as part of these 4 Brahma Viharas, he said, may all sentient beings be happy. May they be free from suffering. All sentient beings meaning, again, that's a Buddhist term, means beings with a mind, and I'll have to come back and explain. But you can think about it just to make it simple, all human beings. Although as a Buddhist, we would also include all the animals, every single animal that exists. Those are also a sentient being that we would wish to be happy and free from suffering. And so I suggest, in Buddhism is a lot about trying things out. Buddhism is, you hear these things from the Buddha, then you should try them out and see if they work. So you should try out this practice, see if it makes you feel happy, if it makes your life better. And I think you will find that it does. And I think the other deeper thing, which is almost slightly positively subversive, is think about every time you wish people to be happy or you wish people to be free from suffering, think about what kind of positive mental habits that's creating in your mind, how it's making you a better human being, a better person. And so you can imagine that if this becomes a habit, if you do this habitually, and I do this habitually, I practice this consciously every day, and I feel that it is slowly making me a better person. It is transforming me. And so that is the way Buddhism works. Buddhism is practical. The goal is, in a very practical way, to transform yourself. And transforming yourself also, as I will come and talk more about, really means transforming your mind. Because it's our mind that makes us happy or makes us suffer, as we will talk more about. And so this is just one simple example of a way that you can do a simple practice that makes your life better. And so anyway, I shouldn't get hung up on this, but it's just useful to know, to sort of get this flavor of how you can practice Buddhism without even having any Buddhist beliefs. But sometimes, people can use Buddhism as sort of a self-help package of things. And I'll come and talk about that in a second. Okay. So one thing that I want to talk a little bit about, which I'm sort of launching into a little bit prematurely, is it's useful to talk about what is Buddhism. So I've been saying that Buddhism is very amorphous, that, you sort of, who a Buddhist is defines themselves. So what is Buddhism? And if you read in the Western literature about Buddhism, you will actually see that different people give different answers to this. So some people say Buddhism is a religion, and I think that's maybe the most standard way of looking at Buddhism. When people try to list how many people of each different type of religion exist in the world, try to count them up, Buddhism is listed as a religion, along with Christianity and Islam and other types of spirituality, Jewish and so forth. So for many people, Buddhism is listed as a religion. However, there's other people who say, well, Buddhism is really just sort of a philosophy. And there are people who practice Buddhism as just a pure philosophy. And I think this goes back, when I talk about Buddhism as a philosophy, this goes back to notions of classical philosophy at the time of Plato and Aristotle, the Epicureans and other types of skeptics, other types of philosophers. In ancient times, ancient Roman and Greek times, philosophy was often thought of as a way of life. It was sort of a helpful, rational way of looking at the world to help you make it easier to live your life and to lead a better life. So in some sense, that's the way that some people would look at Buddhism. It's sort of typical of these sort of helpful philosophies. And there are people who practice that, and that's perfectly fine. For other people, Buddhism is just sort of, aligned with sort of a spiritual way of life. And they don't really, sometimes people don't even really gravitate to any specific Buddhist tradition, but they sort of float free among many of the different Buddhist traditions and just sort of see it as a way of a spiritual life for making their lives better. And of course, as I said, the other way you can look at it, just a grab bag of helpful tricks, helpful ways of, making your life easier, making it easier for you to deal with the difficulties that always come up in ordinary life. And so I would say that all of these are valid. And I think the one thing that Buddha always emphasized is the individuality of each person's spiritual path. There's a notion, a terminology called skillful means in Buddhism, where Buddha, it's said that as Buddha would go to different groups and give teachings, he would adapt his teachings because through his sort of deep spiritual psychic powers, he could sense who the people were who were in front of them and what was most beneficial and helpful for them to learn. And so he would adapt his teaching and give a teaching that was considered to be what they needed to hear or what he thought they needed to hear. Or actually, because of his psychic powers, he could see into their minds what he actually knew they needed to hear. And in Buddhism, that was always considered important, that each individual has to practice the spiritual life that works for them. So Buddhism is about being practical. Not everybody follows the same cookie cutter practice, but there's millions of different Buddhist practice, and you have to adapt the Buddhist path to follow that practice, which is helpful for you at this very single point of time, where you are right now. Buddhism always believes in starting from wherever you are right now at this very minute. And so for you, you should feel free to follow those aspects of Buddhism that you find helpful and beneficial. And that's the other aspect of Buddhism that's important in this worldview. For Buddha, the most important thing is actually helping people, helping them in very practical ways for things that are specifically beneficial for them. So, and in fact, that's the essence, as we will talk about, that's the essence of Buddhist morality. Buddhist morality is being beneficial to people, not in some cookie cutter way. Oh, I should do this because this is moral. I shouldn't do this because this is not moral. It's more like, well, if I do this, is this actually, no matter how it's considered on some grand scale, whether it's considered ethical or not, is this actually going to help that person? Is it going to be beneficial to them? And if it is, you try to do it. And if it looks like it's not going to be beneficial to them, even though it looks like perhaps a very highly moral action, if it's not beneficial to them, don't do it. And so that's the way that Buddhism looks at the world. You have to focus on what is beneficial, and not beneficial in the abstract way of looking at things, but what is beneficial in the concrete for this particular person in this particular situation, this particular environment. That's what's important. And so anyway, that's another thing that one slowly absorbs when one looks at this Buddhist mindset, if you like. Okay, so so again, and if you look at Buddhism, you will see that Buddhism is sort of all over the map in its practices. There are types of Buddhism that seem almost like an abstract philosophy. They're very, it's like, aspects of Zen Buddhism are very beautiful, but Zen Buddhism is this very austere, extraordinarily beautiful, but, very sort of austere religion, religious form of Buddhism. Tibetan Buddhism is the polar opposite of that. It's got tons of religious ceremony, all sorts of religious musical instruments, ways of clothing yourself, temples full of Buddhas and all sorts of elaborate dress and so forth. So Tibetan Buddhism is extremely religious. Other forms, Theravadan Buddhism is fairly austere also. Theravadan Buddhism is probably the form of Buddhism that's closest to what the Buddhist practitioners around the Buddha actually practiced. It developed very early in India and spread to Sri Lanka, and I'll explain more about that. So anyway, there are these different forms of Buddhism. And why is it that there are these different forms? One reason, actually, which is quite interesting, is because Buddha refused to create a pope of Buddhism. It's like, according to the Christian way of looking at the world, when Christ died, he talked about Peter being the rock upon which he built his church and so forth. Well, when the Buddha was near death and he knew he was going to die, and all of his and he explained to his followers that this was going to happen. He was going to go into full nirvana, parinirvana. When this happened, all of the Buddhist practitioners around him went to Buddha and said, "Don't leave us alone. Appoint somebody to lead us. You have been our leader. You've taken care of us. You've been our leader. We need somebody like that to lead us. So please, appoint somebody to take over for you." And the Buddha point blank refused to do that. What the Buddha said, basically, is he said, "I've given you the Dharma. I've given you the Buddhist teachings. That's all you need. You don't need anybody to lead you. Just follow the Buddhist teachings that I've given you. I've given you everything that you need." He also said something that was quite interesting. He said something to the effect of that individuals should either be a lamp or an island unto themselves. In other words, you should use the Buddhist teachings and then rely upon yourself. Now, the reason I say lamp or island is because the word that he used, Dvipa, in Pali, I think, basically has these dual meanings. And the Sanskrit word, that's the analogous Sanskrit, also has these dual meanings. And Buddha, being always very aware of language, I think probably meant both meanings. So in other words, in Buddhism, in the end, it's up to ourselves to become enlightened. Nobody's going to bless you and make you enlightened. You have to put in the work to make yourself that's enlightened. Certainly, you can help, get help from everybody you can, all the other more advanced teachers and deeply spiritual beings. And by all means, you should do that. But in the end, it's up to us. And so we can't, so the Buddha refused to create any sort of central organization, religious organization to carry on. And as a result of that, Buddhism has never had a pope who said, oh, this is the right way to practice, this is the wrong way to practice. Buddhism has always been wide open. And for that reason, Buddhism has developed in many different ways, depending on the deep spiritual teachers that became involved. And as Buddhism moved to different countries, it took on the coloration of the culture of the different countries. So a large part of the reason Tibetan Buddhism has all of this ceremony and so forth is because Tibetans like this sort of thing. So it's taken on this coloration of Tibet. And in the same way, in the Zen tradition, which can be very austere, a lot of simple meditations, temples that, seem very simple, not a lot of decoration or something, absolutely beautiful. Stephen Jobs took a lot of the inspiration for the design of iPhones and stuff from the Zen architectural tradition. But anyway, it's more austere, but that's because that's the Japanese or that particular type of Japanese who embrace that form of Buddhism. And like that for all different forms of Buddhism. So I think it's important to know that if you go to a specific Buddhist tradition, a lot of the coloration you see may not be really Buddhist. It may be part of the culture of where that tradition developed, from which country it developed. But at its core, at a deeper level, all Buddhism is basically the same. So I think that's the message to understand. And basically what I would encourage people to do is if Buddhism is attractive to you and you want to practice it, go to the tradition that resonates with you, that you feel comfortable with. If you like a lot of religious ceremony, go to the Tibetan form. If you like a more austere, if you want to focus more on meditation, then a Zen tradition might be good, and so forth. For me personally, it's sort of ironic. I didn't quite do it this way. I took this introductory course in a Tibetan center, and so I just naturally followed the Tibetan way of doing things without ever really thinking about it. And for me, who grew up in a very heavy religious ceremony, Catholic tradition, I actually do not like a lot of religious ceremony. I would like sort of a more abstract philosophical approach. And yet somehow I ended up in this most ceremonial of all types of Buddhist traditions. However, having gotten started with it, I really can't change now. So I'm sort of stuck with it. Or at least I feel like I don't like to just arbitrarily change a lot. So it's sort of ironic for myself that I ended up where I am. But I sort of trust, again, karma. I sort of trust that for whatever reason, I was led into this tradition and that I should just follow ahead and go where things take me. So, but anyway, if you are new and you haven't chosen yet, you could actually visit different types of traditions and just see what resonates with you and go to the place that you like the best. Okay, so, okay. So the only other thing too that I might mention with respect to culture is that, of course, the Buddha was born and grew up in India. He actually grew up sort of northern India, maybe possibly parts of Nepal. But since the Buddha gave his original teachings in oh yeah, Aaron, go ahead and ask the question.
So one question I have is like, and this is something that I've been thinking about because I'm hearing different things. Well, not different, but yeah, they're different. But like, for example, I know like in Tendai, we talk about Maharavalkana being the universal Buddha. But then I read like in Tibetan, it's I'm sorry, I'm just going to pronounce it, Samantabhadra. And like, when it comes to practice, how do I go about like resolving that?
Okay. Yeah, I don't know your particular form of Buddhism, so I may not be able to answer it in the specific detail of that context. However, I can answer it more generally. Yeah, and I will talk about this more, but in Buddhism, Buddha Shakyamuni is a completely enlightened Buddha. I will explain, you can actually achieve nirvana without becoming a full Buddha. There's a difference, but I'll get into that. But anyway, for beings that are completely enlightened, Buddha Shakyamuni explained that there were other fully enlightened Buddhas before him that came in earlier eras of existence. And there will be other Buddhas that will come along in later eras of existence who will also be fully enlightened. So Buddha Shakyamuni is not just a singular person in the universe. There's not just one Buddha. There's actually probably infinite number of Buddhas. And the other thing too is, I think you mentioned that your form of Buddhism is a Mahayana tradition. In the Mahayana tradition, the goal is actually for all of us to become fully enlightened. And it's believed that that is possible for every single sentient being to eventually become fully enlightened. And in fact, that's what the goal is set out to be. And I'll talk about later on the Mahayana tradition more in detail, bodhicitta, notions of this and so forth. But anyway, especially in the Mahayana tradition, we actually recognize many different Buddhas. In the Tibetan traditions, for example, there's Tara, there's Avalokiteshvara, the Buddha of compassion. There's Manjushri, the Buddha of wisdom. There's just many different, and there's various tantric and Vajrayana Buddhas and so forth. So there's many different types of Buddhas. So there's not just a single Buddha that we follow. So Buddha Shakyamuni is considered, in our era, he's the person that brought the light of Buddhism into our world. Before that, Buddhism, there had been Buddhism in previous world eras, but it sort of mainly dissipated. We were sort of in a dark era. And when Buddha Shakyamuni was born and brought the Buddhist teachings into this current time that we live in, and gave us the teachings, he taught us how to achieve, how to go along the path to full enlightenment. But actually, many people have become enlightened, and we don't worship we don't worship Buddhas as enlightened beings, but Buddhas are basically, in the Mahayana tradition, they are there, they can send down their blessings on us and help us in our spiritual goals. And by praying to them and making a spiritual connection, we can sort of trigger positive karmic help from them to follow along in our spiritual path. So I don't know if that answers your question or gives you a different view of Buddhas.
Well, my question, I think, was kind of like, how do I go about, like, in terms of practice? Like, which one should I see as, I guess, the universal Buddha?
Would they be the same? Buddha. Because basically every single Buddha is identical. Because, one way of looking at this is a Buddha is a perfect being. And so all perfect beings are identical. Now, there were, so you ask, so if all Buddhas are essentially identical in their nature, why are there so many different Buddhas? And the reason that's given in the Tibetan Mahayana tradition is that during their lifetimes before they became Buddhas, different types of Buddhas made vows and prayers to help people in different ways. And then because they made those prayers and vows to help different people, when they became a fully enlightened Buddha, somehow that karmic connection continues. And that by praying to those different Buddhas or making connections to them, we can sort of tap into that accumulation of positive merit or karma that they created on their way to the path of Buddhism. So in the Tibetan tradition, people, when they want to develop their wisdom, they will often do, for example, Manjushri practice, because Manjushri is the Buddha of wisdom. If they want to develop their compassion more, they will often do the practice of Avalokiteshvara, because Avalokiteshvara is the Buddha of compassion. So by making connections to different Buddhas, it can sometimes accelerate your practice in one aspect of your practice, like compassion or wisdom or things like that. But in their very nature, all Buddhas are identical. And so what I would say that in terms of practice, I would just work with whatever Buddha you resonate with. It really doesn't matter which one you use. There's no difference. They're all the same. They will all be equally beneficial. And so in a certain sense, different, I guess what I would say is that due to the history of different Buddhist paths, there have been certain great teachers who have had special connections with certain specific Buddhas. And because of that, they actually, in their community, have developed special practices to connect with that special Buddha. And so then one particular Buddha becomes important in one specific Buddhist sect or tradition, but it's more of a historical thing than anything else. And so what I would say is it really doesn't matter. Just feel free to connect with, if you found a tradition that feels good to you, that you resonate with, just go with whatever Buddha that they're working with. Because all Buddhas by nature are the same. All Buddhas are perfect, infinite beings of infinite power, and they all are equally beneficial. And so it really doesn't matter. I mean, I think I keep hearing you say it, but I want it to matter. I want one to be more powerful than the others. I don't know, maybe I'm paraphrasing you or something.
No. It's that answers my question perfectly. It's because I'm just scared of like messing it up. Like, I guess I was kind of thinking of the path as more linear, maybe. Like you can't get off or something.
Yeah. No, it's not linear at all. And in fact, the point of Buddhism is you can't mess it up. I think one way to look at it is that if you are genuinely seeking a spiritual path, if you are doing the best you can, you will always get the help you need. Somehow it will come to you. And so if you have found a specific Buddhist path congenial to you, that's no accident. Accidents don't happen in Buddhism. Somehow you have created the causes and condition for you to connect with this specific Buddhist tradition. And in that sense, I think you have to just trust that you will be taken care of, that things will work out, that by practicing, trying to be a spiritual being, you are creating positive karma. And that positive karma is ripening in the ways that you need it to ripen. And so the thing I would always recommend to people is don't be uptight about your practice, be open. Have this open spirit of exploring, sort of feeling out what feels right and sort of going in the direction that your feelings lead you. And like I say, as long as you are practicing in a positive way with the desire to get better, it will work out. And in fact, in the Tibetan tradition, one of the things that's really emphasized is they actually emphasize asking the Buddhas for help. That's considered a really important thing to do, to continually ask for help from the Buddhas. And I think one way, and you can ask, well, why should that work? And I think that part of the reason why it works is because in the mere act of asking for help, it's like you're expressing a positivity. You're expressing a desire to follow a positive spiritual path. And I think whenever you put that wish out there, any such positive action like that is going to ripen in some kind of positive karma, and it's going to bring benefit. So I think I would always say, don't worry, don't get uptight. Do what feels best to you, and you don't have to worry about screwing up. Just trying to be open, keep trying to be a better person, keep trying to follow. And again, and Buddhism is very practical. When you're following a Buddhist tradition, you should always keep asking yourself, is this working? Is this beneficial for me? Is this helping me along my spiritual path? And if it is, I would say, keep going. If it's not, I would say, well, be open to other things happening. And if you're open to other things happening, then whatever you need to help you will somehow appear to you. And if you're open enough to be open to what's going on, you will find what you need. So I don't know if that's helpful to you, but that's my own personal understanding of the practices I've gone through Buddhism.
No, that's really helpful. That actually puts a lot of things in perspective, I think, for me.
Okay, good. I'm glad that that's helpful. I mean, a lot of what I'm doing is in this course is I'm actually acting like a Sangha friend. And I'm just telling you, I've been doing this for like 20 years, pretty intensely, taking course after course, reading many books. And I keep always trying to understand at a deeper level. And so what I'm telling you is just basically my own experience. And then of course the goal is for you to go out and practice and see if it works for you. Because you have to develop your own experience, because that's the way Buddhism is. Okay. So I will go ahead then. Okay. So maybe that's enough on this thing. What is Buddhism? So now what I want to talk a little bit about is I want to talk a little bit about the benefits that you get from Buddhism. And I would say that the main idea in Buddhism, is a nutshell, is Buddhism is about the wish to be happy and the wish to avoid suffering. For Buddha himself, actually, the word suffering is a little bit generalized. What they talk about is dukkha, which really means something closer to being unsatisfactory. And of course, suffering is unsatisfactory. So suffering is sort of a more, if you like, generalized form of suffering. But just the very fact of that in samsara, you can never find any sort of satisfactory way of living that is really okay. We need to go beyond that. And as I will talk about in Buddha's life story, this is all really tied up in his life story. So the goal in Buddhism of us is to be happy. But there's different forms of happiness. There's superficial and there's deeper forms of happiness. The superficial forms of happiness are material happiness, things like lots of money, eating delicious meals, all of those things. And what the Buddha said is ultimately, surprisingly enough, the Buddha said that ultimately those things are actually suffering, but suffering more in this unsatisfactory. And what he meant by that is they're not satisfying. It's this sort of thing, you eat this most delicious meal, and what happens? You want to eat more. And, it's like you can never satisfy yourself. No matter how much you eat, you may be full, you may be ready to throw up, but from the taste of it, you still want more and more. And that's the way all of samsaric pleasures are. There is no samsaric pleasure that is ultimately completely satisfying. However, in spiritual satisfaction, especially at the deeper levels of meditation, at deep levels of meditation and so forth, spiritual happiness is actually satisfying. So anyway, the goal is actually to find the satisfying form of happiness. And of course, the goal of everyone is to avoid suffering, pain, being dissatisfied. And Buddha emphasizes over and over again, he's here in a practical way to help us with this problem. And in fact, it's more than just to help us. Buddha said, I solved this problem. And at a deeper level, that's what liberation, nirvana, all of these enlightenment are. It's the solution to this problem of unsatisfactory or painful existence. And basically, the Buddha said, I found the solution. And all you need to do is do the same things I did, and you will arrive at the same position I am, where I have once and for all eternity, have conquered this problem. So, so anyway, along those, and again, Buddha was very practical, and he was all throughout his teachings, he would give all these metaphors of different things, because he found that people found metaphors very helpful in understanding. And one metaphor in this aspect is that of the arrow. So he says, imagine you're walking in a forest, some hunter mistakes you for a deer and shoots you with a poisoned arrow. When that happens, what are you going to do? He said, well, what all of us will do is our friends will come and help us. They'll focus on the immediate problem, the poison arrow. So they'll try to somehow remove the arrow. They'll try to maybe, introduce antidotes for the poison, maybe cauterize the thing to prevent infection. They'll work on the real problem. He says what they won't do is they won't say, oh, what a beautiful arrow this is. God, look at the woodwork of this arrow. It's so beautiful. Look at the feathers. I wonder what bird the feathers came from and so forth. And basically what Buddha said is that's the philosophical way of looking at things. We wonder about all these different aspects, when the real problem is that we're suffering and we need relief from suffering. And so what the Buddha said, he says, I'm practical. I'm here to help you for that relief from suffering. I'm not interested in general philosophy and all of these other things. I am here to directly help you, get away from all of this suffering. So that's an important way of again, the Buddhist point of view. Of course, Buddhism involves huge amounts of compassion and caring. One way of looking at this is that in Buddhism, we understand that we all are the same. All of us are the same in the sense that we may have different, body shapes, color, eyes, hair, so forth. But those are superficial things. At the deepest level, in a deep psychological sense, all of us are the same. All of us want satisfying happiness, and all of us want to avoid suffering and pain, dissatisfaction. And because of that, why should my happiness be better than your happiness? So why should I experience happiness? So if for me to be happy, I have to cause you suffering, maybe by stealing your goods or taking your wife or something like that, why should that be a good thing? We're all at an equal level. There's no reason why, for me to achieve my happiness, I should cause you suffering or pain. That would simply be wrong. And so this is a very deep cord that runs all through Buddhism. And once you follow this train of thought, it becomes immediately obvious that we have to have compassion and love and concern for all sentient beings, for all other human beings. We have to develop this. That there's sort of no choice. And so this becomes very important, and I will talk more about this. Another thing which I will talk about is that Buddhism has a focus on others, which is very similar to this notion of compassion and love. And basically, a lot of the negative karmic states that cause this problem involve things like greediness, wanting things for ourselves, and being willing to do negative actions that harm other people in order to get satisfy this sort of these greedy notions, this grasping, greedy things, wanting things for ourselves, or anger, pushing away things whenever we feel threatened or anybody we don't like, we always push them away and we develop hatred. So these notions of greediness and hatred are the sort of negative things, as I will talk more about karma, that creates negative karma that ultimately will, as the Buddha explained, result in suffering. And so in Buddhism, we develop this focus of wishing to benefit others, wishing to have compassion and love for people. And what we discover is that by doing this, we create enormous amounts of positive karma, which again, ultimately do make us happy. And so there is this constant notion of concern for others and sort of trying to get away from egotistical ways of looking at the world. And one other thing too, which I should mention in passing, is that another fundamental notion of Buddhism is that when Buddha taught Dharma, Dharma is really about the way the world really is. And so Buddha said, I didn't invent Dharma. I'm not a creator God. I was once a human being like yourself. But the difference between me and you is I see the way the world really works. And in particular, I see these notions of karma and how they create positive suffering, positive experiences or negative suffering. But these things are not just random. These aren't things I created, but these are sort of just natural laws. This is the way the world works. And I'm just pointing these things out to you. And so you should think of the laws of karma, for example, as being no different than gravitational laws. In the same way that gravity is just a force of nature, and it just works the way it is. So karma and all of these other dharmic notions are the same way. They're just laws of nature. And so the Buddha isn't really developing a personal philosophy, telling you to do that. He's just showing you how the world works. And if you work sort of along with the world and work in the ways that are positive and benefit, you can use this knowledge of how the world really is to create this better life for yourself. And so that's why this notion of ignorance and knowledge and wisdom are so critically important in Buddhism. And so I will come back and talk more about this as we go along. And so again, there is this notion of karma. And basically, the main notion of it is harming other people or yourself creates negative karma. Benefiting or being positive to other people in some way is the way you generate positive karma. So there are sort of like 10 karmic laws of, it's almost like the equivalent of the 10 commandments in Christianity. But if you look at them at a very deep level, they all involve notions of harming or non-harming. And so I think that sort of ethical notion is something to keep in the back of your mind. Another thing that's very important in Buddhism is mindfulness. The Buddha, one thing I will talk about is what creates karma is actually your intention. So if you have the intention to harm, that's what creates negative karma. And if you have the intention to be beneficial, that's what creates positive karma. It's this intention which is so tied up with karma. And so once you realize this, it's important to be aware of how you're acting at every minute during the day. And that's what mindfulness is just being aware of what's going on in your life. Because if you're not aware of what's going on in your life, you can be creating all tons of negative karma and not even be aware of it. You may have tons of negative attitudes. But one of the paths forward to spirituality is first learning who you are, how you habitually act, and sort of seeing that. And meditation is especially very, very helpful in developing this way of developing this kind of mindfulness. But it's very important because that's part of the way of turning yourself around more into the spiritual path, is first being aware of just where you are right now. And then when you see yourself engaging in negative actions, developing antidotes or ways of acting differently. So you stop doing that and developing habitual ways of acting that bring you in a more positive direction, and being aware of when you're being positive and when you're being negative. So that's very important. Again, another thing which I've already talked about is Buddhism is very non-authoritarian. I mean, the Buddha never set up a pope of Buddhism. There is this sense of ourselves having to take responsibility for our own karmic actions, for actually, developing our own positivity or negativity, which doesn't mean we can't get help, but in the bottom line, if we create negative actions, we develop negative karma, and it's going to rebound on us. And there's no blessing or any. Well, there are actually ways that you can purify negative karma that we'll talk about. But in general, the goal is to really change ourselves, change our minds from make our minds more pure being more positive, more beneficial. And I think in the end, what's really powerful about Buddhism is that in the end, I will again talk from my own personal experience, because I think that's important. And I think, each of you have to develop your own personal experience. But what I find for myself personally is day by day, I find that my life is better. I feel better about my life. I feel better about who I am. I feel like my life is moving in a positive direction, that I'm becoming a better person, that my mind is filled with more positivity, less negativity. As I will explain, the other aspect of the worldview of Buddhism is everything is continuous. Buddha gave this beautiful example of saying that spiritual practice is like walking into the ocean. As you walk in, if you have this sandy beach where the water gradually gets deeper and deeper, that's the way Buddhism is. We may start off with a lot of negativity and so forth. That's okay. But what happens is that we gradually progress continuously, gradually improving our spiritual practice little by little, working on this little thing, that little thing. And over time, it all accumulates and it makes a difference. And we go deeper into the ocean. So Buddhism is about that. Buddhism is about being very practical. You don't jump instantly from where we are now to full enlightenment. There are some notions of Satori in Japan. However, what you will really find is, so it looks like there might be sometimes big jumps, but what you will find is there was probably preparation in previous lives or earlier in this life that prepared the way for that sudden jump. Again, there are no discontinuities in Buddhism. Everything is continuous. Everything depends on cause and effect. And if anything happens, it happens because the causes and effects were brought into being to create that effect. So again, and I think, and again, for myself personally, I find that the longer I practice Buddhism, the more satisfied with it, the more it makes me happy. I love learning more about Buddhism. It brings joy to me. And I love Buddhist practice. And I think that for most people, of course, everybody goes through their plateaus and so forth. Everybody goes through certain times of spiritual difficulty. But if you average through all of that, for me, Buddhism has been a very satisfying path. And I feel it's just constantly making my life better every moment. And I couldn't imagine not being a Buddhist and not doing this kind of practice. So, okay, so we've hit 8:30, and I don't want to run over because I know people are very busy and they don't like it if we go over too much. So I didn't get quite as far as I wanted, but I think the things that I was talking about are important. And I think one needs to develop some kind of feel for Buddhism, what it is and how it works in practice, what sort of mindsets go along with it. So I hope this is helpful. So next time I will go back to the life story of Buddhism, how it spread, and I will go into the Four Noble Truths, the deepest teaching of the Buddhism, which you will see actually connects with all of these other things I've been talking about. The other thing I find very beautiful about Buddhism is that ultimately it hangs together. It's a coherent worldview. Everything reinforces every other thing. And that's why, if you're doing Buddhist practice, if you're focused on one specific thing and you really feel like this is the sort of thing you need to focus on at this moment, you don't have to worry, because this thing that you're focusing on will help the other aspects of Buddhism. And then when you go off and learn these other things, they will also help the other aspects. Every aspect of Buddhism reinforces the other aspects. And in fact, one of the people that started our tradition, Lama Tsongkhapa, always emphasized this in his teachings. He said, how much of Buddhism do you have to practice? And he always said, you have to practice all of it, because every aspect helps you in some way and helps reinforce the other aspects. And what he said is at various times, this part of your practice may fall down, so you may want to put more emphasis on that. But in the end, we sort of keep it all going because it's all beneficial. And again, I think it's the sort of thing you shouldn't get uptight about it. But I think, we have a lot of natural wisdom. And I think we do, especially in the Mahayana Buddhism, there's this belief that we're actually getting help from all of the Buddhas who have previously existed and who are still here. And they're constantly raining down help. And I have a deep confidence that if you have a genuine desire to practice, you will always get the help you want. If you're open to it, it will somehow always appear. So I would say, don't get uptight about your practice, but just do what seems best and keep trying to do more. So anyway, I'll stop here. Are there any last questions? Again, if there's specific things you want me to talk about, please mention them, because in a small course like this, I can shift what I talk about to whatever people are interested in. So any other last questions?
No, thank you. This was excellent. Thank you.
Okay, well, you're welcome. And so I will show up next week. And like I say, next week, we'll start getting more into the really specific practices, the more details, understanding the life of Buddha and how Buddhism spread, what his main teachings are, really starts getting us more deeper into Buddhism in a very deep way. And then we will keep progressing all the way to, ultimately the end of Vajrayana Tantric Buddhism, explain how that fits in, which is actually a form of the Mahayana tradition, which I will explain. So anyway, I hope to see you next week. I hope this has been helpful. And so thank you for joining, and I will see you next week.
Oh,